Now, I know what you're thinking, English people. You are thinking, I'd like an English voice to come on so I could stop translating your Scottish accent in my head before I got the jokes. You're in for a treat, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome a very funny and very dry English comedian, Mr. Simon Evans!
Thank you very much. Good evening. How are you? Well? Delighted to be here. I really am. I should explain one thing before I go any further. I am not a very mobile comedian. I'm aware I've got a large stage and a very large auditorium, and yet I will not be addressing the extremities of the front row to any degree whatsoever. I do apologize. It's nothing personal. I actually have medical condition which warrants this immobility. I went to see a doctor about it quite recently. Indian chap. Well, they call it Indian chap, it's just nappy rash, really, but it's... I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm 49 years of age. I live on the south coast with my wife, 14 years. That's the period in which we've been married, obviously. And let's make that absolutely clear in the current climate. I met my wife about 14 years ago. We got married quite quickly. Unfortunately, we left it too late to have children. But we went ahead and had them anyway, which was a mistake in my view, but there we are. Couple of children. We've had an interesting trajectory through the British Isles. I met my wife. I just bought my first flat. It was just north of King's Cross, rather disreputable area in North London, famous red light district. And it was true, we had prostitutes right outside our own front door, which is handy, some of you are thinking, but believe me, you don't want to shit on your own doorstep. Which is a service they offer, incidentally, and I was shocked, to be honest, by how brazen they were. I suppose you have to be in that line of work, but I came out of my door one day, a woman came up to me and said, "You looking for business, love?" I was quite clearly dressed for tennis. It was embarrassing, but then she's plucked up the courage to make the first move, and I'm a gentleman, so it's a difficult situation. They were a distraction to tradesmen as well. I remember very clearly, I ordered plasterers in to do the place up when we were trying to sell it. Well, I looked in the yellow pages for plasterers. I think I may have ordered piss takers by mistake. They would be next to each other alphabetically, I assume, and 400 quid a day for what is essentially glorified cake decoration. Spend most of that time sitting on the front wall chatting up prostitutes and talking about somebody called Rigsby, as if I'm supposed not to guess who they're talking about. Few of you remember that. I've been told throughout most of my life I resemble Leonard Rossiter when I speak. I don't know if it's true. I have one or two... I get it a lot. You do when you're a stand-up comedian. I've had one or two more flattering ones. One woman told me I remind her of Ralph Fiennes, another that I reminded her of Sting, who is a twat, but a handsome twat, so I'll take it. Within a week, somebody else had told me I reminded them of Sandy Toksvig. Shortly after that, I began to experiment with the beard, but... It's interesting. I mean, I quite like gritty urban areas, to be honest. It makes your own life seem quite desirable by comparison. King's Cross certainly fitted that bill. A lot of homeless people on the streets, or possibly just outdoor lager enthusiasts, but they seem to be very committed to it if they did have a home to go to. As a rule, I don't want to tar them all with the same brush, although if you sleep on the road, that will happen sooner or later, but... I do think it's a bit ironic. The favourite drink of the homeless should be a beer called Tennant's. That must rankle, mustn't it? The trick is, as it is with all commerce, of course, is to make people think they're buying into a lifestyle they can't really afford. And we all fall for it at every station in life. I recently bought myself a diver's watch. Ridiculous affectation. I have no need for it. It's covered in dials, good for up to 100 meters of water pressure. It's got a shark-resistant strap. I think, to be honest, if all he wants is your watch, it's probably best to let him have it, really. I'm no expert, but they're fairly ferocious negotiators, aren't they, the old sharks? I think only a fool would allow an argument to escalate over a watch. Can't seem to bite through this. I know, I'll try the arm. I don't know, never faced a shark. The only diving I ever do, it's considered very bad manners to check your watch. Must admit the luminous dial has come in handy, but that's more coincidence than planning. I find 100 meters deep, I'm getting out of there, which, of course, is unlikely to happen, because I'm a happily married man. So let's be clear that that's an entirely hypothetical scenario. I am happily married, and I've made a good choice of wife. She actually moved in as a lodger initially. I remember it was about, let's say, 13, 14 years ago. My wife moved in as a lodger. And one week the rent fell a bit short, and one thing led to another, and there we were in a dance as old as time. That's what you had to do in the days before internet dating, you see. Set a bit of a honey trap. Cash point at this time of night around here? I shouldn't think so, no. But it was wonderful. To be honest, it was a lovely time. It was a golden age. You don't always know when you're living through them, but looking back, I remember she was very accommodating. My job isn't the easiest one for somebody to accommodate in their life. I'd get home late at night, but she'd be waiting up with a bottle of wine. That was nice. And Sunday morning, she'd let me have a lie-in. We might share a pot of coffee over the Sunday papers, then walk hand in hand through a craft market, something like that. Looking back, it sounds a bit shit, I realise, but at the time, filtered through the haze of romantic infatuation, it seemed very agreeable. So I proposed, and she accepted. We got married. She said, let's start a family. And I said, of course, darling, because I didn't think it through. Next thing you know, you're running a small, badly funded correctional facility together, aren't you? That's all it is. However much various commercial organisations dress it up. Imagine you started a small business with somebody, it goes well, you move into profit, you open a second branch, everything is going swimmingly. Suddenly, one day they turn to you and say, this is good, isn't it? What do you say we get a troop of baboons in to run the post room? That's the equivalent. Let's see how that goes. I'm sorry, I can't pretend otherwise. I resent their presence in my life, I do. They are nice enough kids. Objectively, but why do they have to live with me? It makes no sense at all. And I refuse to feel guilty about these observations. For most of recorded history, my views have held sway. You look at the Victorian era, when most of the important parts of London were built, when we used to double our GDP every 3 years and held dominion over dozens of other nations to which we had no legitimate claim whatsoever through sheer force of will and guns. Partly because it was understood across all sections of society. Children are a nuisance until they are a resource. This was the primary governing philosophy of parenting, if you like. If you had money, you sent them away to be educated. Far away, they were sent to a boarding school or whatever it was. Most of the year, they'd come home for about 3 days at Christmas time, be looked after by a governess. You weren't formally introduced to your son until he was at least 12 years of age. You could carry on a decent conversation about foreign policy at the dinner table instead of endlessly informing you as to whether or not he likes effing peas on this occasion. No, these are not the ways we parent now. Having children has a massive impact on your life. I think we're through the worst of it now, but I remember very clearly. The worst of it, I remember when Matilda was about 3 and Edward was nothing. Edward was nothing, as indeed Matilda was for an entire year, and I never shied away from saying as much either. It's ridiculous, with 3 months, 2 days and 4 hours, ridiculous. He's nothing. It's a logical fact. He is yet to be 1, therefore he's nothing. He's not a fraction, is he, for God's sake? People get offended by that. We were living in Brixton at the time, I remember. Social services were informed on one occasion. We lived in Brixton, so they didn't come, but they sent us a leaflet. 2, actually, one on parenting and one on numeracy, but just in case. But when they were young, life was intolerable. I remember there was a TV show on at the time, it was a few years ago now. Callum Best, well-known playboy and bon viveur, self-diagnosed sex addict. Callum Best, they often are self-diagnosed, you find. But he was taken seriously by MTV at any rate. He was challenged by MTV to see if he could go without sex for 36 days, I think it was, and the cameras would track him as he attempted this superhuman feat of self-deprivation. 36 days he would wander, Jesus-like, in the sexual wilderness. No doubt many of his fans were anxious. All I could think was, if going without sex for 36 days it's worth his own TV show, my sex life is worth its own epic channel right now. So I go 36 days between wanks. Even those are rarely completed on the first attempt before somebody's hammering at the bathroom door, wants a nappy changed or some nonsense. I'm getting a shed, nice little garden potting shed. My grandfather had one. I never saw the appeal, but I get it now. Oh, yeah. The convenient masking aroma of the compost. Handy little pots. Spider's webs for target practice. And I've got one now as well. I have secured my shed. It's important to keep the kids out of it, obviously, but the trick to doing that is not to forbid them from going in there, it's to actually threaten them with the shed. That works much more successfully, I've discovered. I actually call it the ghost shed, and at birthdays and so on, I lock a child in there and it starts to get dark after a couple of hours and they get really quite spooked out. It's marvellous. I've also told them about the fox, who I've told them has made his home in the shed. It's a fairly obvious fiction. There is no fox. And it's not the most inventive name I could have come up with for an escaped psychopath and child catcher, but it works. And if they do get in there, that will at least explain the old pile of whiskey bottles and pornography that they find. So. But I try and be young. I try and be young for the children. I allowed a dog into our house about a year ago. Not just for the day. I mean, we bought a dog. Not that harsh. It was against my inclinations, I have to say, to be honest, but 12 months on, and I wish we'd done it years ago, because then it might be dead by now. It has been, without doubt, the most catastrophic decision, but this is my wife's doing again. My wife is very proactive. She likes to see things happen. She is adventurous, and she likes to take on projects. She went to Trail Finders, I think, and came back with a brochure entitled The Parks, a huge thing, about an inch thick, detailing all the amusement parks you could visit in Florida if you were so minded. You have seen these advertisements on the television. I was watching one with my wife. 2 children, about the same age as ours, little tears of joy and wonder springing in their eyes as they gazed up at the fireworks exploding over the Princess Castle. My wife turned to me and said, not as you might expect, Christ, will you look at that shit, can you believe it? No. Unaccountably, she said, you know, our kids would love that, but they're getting to the age where it would be perfect. Soon it will be too late. Matilda will be a teenager, there will be sarcasm and eye-rolling. If you want to give them that experience, it's now or never. And I thought, great, so never is an option, right? But it turns out, no. In fact, that was a rhetorical device. The correct answer is now. I thought, well, this doesn't look like my cup of tea, but the kids will love it, I suppose. How bad can it be? Really, it'll be no worse than visiting a fairground on an uncomfortably hot day and chucking $4 grand in a bin on the way out. That's roughly what I was praised for. In reality, it is actually far worse than that. More like $8 grand by the time we were finished. But also the heat, the humidity, the confusion, the jet lag, which I hadn't factored in. My general state, my mood was not a good one. I remember it was on about the 4th day in some unnamable park, and I was about to really lose my rag with some furry-faced idiot I didn't even recognize from any movie I'd ever seen, who'd allowed me to stand in the wrong queue for half an hour, when I felt a little tug at my sleeve, and I looked down, and there was my son, Edward, 4 years of age as he was at that time, and he looked up at me, and he had tears sparkling in his eyes, just like in the advert. And he looked up at me and he said, Daddy, this is bollocks. It makes my heart swell even telling you the story now. I'm not sure it wasn't worth $8 grand just to have it confirmed. It's a DNA test with a bit of polish on it, that was. That's all from me, folks. You've been a wonderful audience. Thanks very much indeed. Take care. Thank you. Good night.
It's a Simon Evans show, ladies and gentlemen! Thank you.